Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Tired F1 pod. We are back and we are better than ever. And we're joined by my friend, your friend, Double Waved Yellow. How you doing?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. How are you guys?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. How are you, Ammar?
Hey, well, I'm tired, but I'm here, man.
Right. So today I thought we'd do something slightly different. And the hook for our topic today is a little article that came out in motorsport.com a couple of weeks ago where a certain four-time world champion, Alain Prost, said, wait for this, it sounds like a joke, but I'm completely underrated. We did an episode of the Tired F1 pod where Ammar was quite happy to just dismiss Alain Prost as out of the top five of all time.
Say it right. I used the word meh for it. That's what I did.
You said meh. That is the most Alain Prost response I have ever heard.
He should not be offended by me.
Except he will be, right? So,
I mean, okay.
So this episode is me trying to defend Alain as the most underrated four-time world champ ever, with double arch Prost antagonists.
This is not going to end well for you, man. By the way, before we get into this, to all of our viewers who dearly, dearly love Shez, you're welcome. This is a present for you. Enjoy. Give us more likes, subscribes, whatever. Don't give it. It's okay. But this is a present, a gift from us to you. All right, go ahead, Shez.
Yeah. So look, just a bit of table setting, right? First of all, this is not me trying to say that Alain Prost is better than X driver. And you know which X driver I'm talking about, right? I'm not trying to say, Alain better than Senna. That's not what I'm trying to do here. This is why is it that Alain is underappreciated? And is that actually true? Is he actually underappreciated? As always, we've all done a bit of reading for this. The big ones that I think are worth reading are Alain Prost's biography by Maurice Hamilton that was done as a McLaren commission. And the second one is an excellent book by Malcolm Foley called Senna versus Prost. There's also a little bit from Richard Williams, who did the Death of Ayrton Senna, which is a really good book in terms of it paints a nice contemporary picture of what things were like around the time that Imola 1994 happened, and how Senna and Prost were both viewed afterwards. But I'll just kick this off. I don't think that there is anyone that can have won as many titles as Alain Prost has that can be as massively underrated as he is. And I think a big part of that is because he falls under the shadow of Senna driving at the same time as him. And that colours everyone's view of him. What do you think?
I'm going to let Double take this one because I already gave you my opinion, which is meh.
So I think that every driver can only race the people who are put on the grid with them. And Prost had a very long career where he was able to sort of span a couple of generations of talents. Like he came in 1980 as the new young guy, and then Senna came in as the next one, right as Prost was hitting his peak and winning his McLaren championships in 85 and 86. And I just want to say I have two of those three books that you mentioned on my shelf, so we're on the same page here. But I think that you can't be so categorically out-qualified by all of your teammates and say that you are underrated. Also, I think it's kind of rich to say that you're a four-time champion and you're underrated, because by definition, you have 4 world championships, and it's impossible to be underrated with 4 world championships. He's on the pantheon of the, you look at the world championships, most, and he's in the top groups. So I don't think you can underrate him just by his pure statistics. He's going to be featured in, and I think that it balances out in terms of his 93 season really padded some of his stats in that really advantageous Williams with the active ride. And, you know, a guy who had 30 poles in his career, or 33 poles in his career, got, I have it up here, 13 of those poles in that one season. His entire career prior to that, he was outqualified by his teammate Rennie Arnoux twice. He outqualified Lauda twice. He was outqualified by Senna by a combined score of 26-4 in terms of pole positions. And he tied with Keke and in 86, and he was he had a bad year in 87. That the tag was at the end of its life, so I'm not really counting 87. I think that was actually one of Prost's better years. I will give him that, because that car was massively underpowered.
Yeah, it needed a new engine at that point, didn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm saying he's rated. I'm not saying he's over or under. I'm saying he's right about where he deserves to be. And he had some weaknesses as a complete driver that were made up for in the era in which he raced. So I think that, and I see that, I'll let you go.
Well,
I'll get into that in a minute.
It's just that there's clearly a divide here between what we think is what our definition of best or great is, right? Because for me, it's a complete picture, and I take your point that you do have to have pace as part of that as well. I don't think Alain was at any point lacking in pace. This is, you know, I take your point about Nicky's stat, but Nicky was the first to say this guy is unbelievably fast. That's why I'm having trouble keeping up with him, and that's why 84 was so difficult for Nicky, and why he was comprehensively beaten in 85.
Well, he broke down every race in 85. DNF pretty much every single race.
That is part of what Prost does, right? Because you're either going to be, especially in that era, you're either going to be super fast in qualifying, a la sort of Senna, a la Piquet, a la Nigel Mansell, or you're going to keep it all together and accumulate more race wins, which is actually what ultimately he did. And you have to decide what is more important to you, which I think Alain did as a conscious thing in an era where you could set up the car so differently between qualifying and the race that they were almost two different cars. Best example of that, and it's one of the races that he thought was one of the races that he was closest to perfect. Mexico 1990, you know, that the Ferrari was nowhere in practice. He was out qualified massively by Nigel. He started the race 13th. Senna races off into the lead, kills his tires, absolutely kills his tires to the point that he gets a puncture, but not before Alain's caught everybody else in front of him, past Nigel Mansell and past Senna. That for me is an archetypal Prost win. It is what he does best. He sees the bigger picture and drives to what he needs to do to get the best result out of himself and the car.
So my brother, I told him, I said, I'm going to be on a podcast where we're going to talk about Alain Prost. And he has watched all of the old races with me. And he said, you better have a response to Mexico 1990 because that's going to come up. And I do. What do we remember from that race?
Don't say it. It's not Nigel Mansell going past Berger. That's not what I remember.
But that is the lasting memory of that race. The limitations in Alain Prost's, like he was, I kind of call him like the great accumulator. He would kind of sit back and he would wait for his rivals to fall by the wayside, either cooking their tires, cooking their engine, or just regular, mechanical DNFs in an era where 7 cars finished and that was pretty good. Like especially in the turbo era in the mid 80s when he was kind of at his peak, the Williams were faster. Piquet was a better qualifier, but Prost just managed to put it on the second row, stay out of trouble, and unspectacularly win from like at this. They always said Alain Prost was like he would win at the slowest possible speed.
But
And that's a great. Yeah, but that's a great strategy to win a lot of races.
Yeah.
But it's not a great way to be remembered. It's not a great way to have a highlight reel. Like think of Nigel Mansell and think of 4 great overtaking moves. I bet you we won't agree on the same 4 because Nigel Mansell has like, for all of his limitations, he has memorable moments that you can just say, that is quintessential Mansell. For Senna, we've got those onboards of his qualifying laps that are just visceral, that screaming V10, just going through Jerez and splitting cars. And like Prost, it's just like, it's like Jenson Button. He was very, very like, he didn't have a lot of, he was just very calculated, very, steady, unspectacular. And you can say that that's a credit, but it's also not what gets you remembered. And it's not what sets, like, how many Grand Slams do you think that Prost had? 0. So, I mean, he's like, because he was so infrequently on pole, right? But in his prime. But
so what we're arguing is spectacle versus result, right?
No, what I'm saying is that a true measure of a driver includes some consideration of raw pace and qualifying ability, as well as being the guy that gets to the finish, and that he operated in an era in which that was valued above everything else. And I'll tell you, one thing that kind of drives this home is that a lot of people like to say, oh, well, Prost would have had 7 championships if all the points had counted. But that's the whole thing. He existed in an era where reliability was so bad that they had to drop scores.
That's right, and he still won titles in that era, despite being the guy that was just picking up points. That goes against what he should have been doing. He should have been going out there and qualifying hard. And
it doesn't, though. It's like they were trying to peg back guys like Prost who weren't spectacular and weren't pushing. They actually actively said, this is not a driving championship. This is just a tootling around waiting for people to fail championship. Kind of like what we have now in Formula Pirelli.
Anyway. Okay.
But
so now we're getting to it.
But here's the thing with Prost is that he would just basically say, qualifying doesn't matter. I'm just going to go out there and just get to the finish and wait for my rivals to fall by the wayside. And I don't think that that's like what we remember and what we value as a racing driver in terms of like, he's earned his plaudits and he's earned his place as one of the greats. But to say he's underrated, no, it's because he wasn't somebody who captured our imagination. He wasn't somebody who had those moments of brilliance. He was a guy who was very stoic and very controlled, relaxed. Like even watch him in the rain, like he was awful in the rain, like awful in the rain.
Again,
but he did it on purpose. Yes, consciously. He could have been a lot faster, but he just didn't want to. And he thought it was too risky. But our memories of Senna are blasting around Estoril in the pouring rain, which actually Prost crashed out of. And,
because he couldn't get past Elio De Angelis, that was his problem.
And then we had like the Monaco Grand Prix that was cut short, which Senna and Beloff were, reeling him in hand over fist, and probably both would have passed him.
And probably if they had, he would have, and they kept going, he probably would have won the championship that season.
Well, third wouldn't have done it for him, I don't think, because it was only 4 points. So he got 4.5.
I think Beloff would have. I think Beloff would have struggled in the end.
Oh, and didn't Tyrrell lose all their points anyway? Didn't they?
I don't know. Did they?
Tyrrell got disqualified from the season because they fell out with Bernie.
Was that because of the fuel irregularity, because they were putting ball bearings in their car?
But it was actually politics. It was because they were the only non-turbo team and they were messing with Bernie, and he was like, it was that whole thing. But yeah, I think that would have actually given him the championship if he could have been second that race and it had gone the whole distance.
Yeah.
But
I take your point, right? I totally get this, right? And I know that I'm fighting his corner from a point of view of a cerebral driver. It's somebody that thinks his way through a race rather than viscerally attacks a track. It's hardly like this is not what we're seeing right now. You know, in the Pirelli era, who's been the most successful driver so far? The guy that is able to manage his tires the best.
Okay, no,
right?
Yes, but it's
please
not.
Please explain to me how I'm wrong.
Because, but that's also partly because of the way the car is designed too. Like Red Bull, it goes pretty easy on its tires. There's this sort of.
I'm not even talking about Max Verstappen. I'm talking about Lewis as well. Lewis and Max both. Their key attribute is that they can make tires last whilst maintaining.
We're talking
pace.
about different. I mean, yes, tire management has become the thing now. I get it. But there's a difference between that and managing an entire race. Like
that's exactly what the whole point of Formula One is. Formula One is about managing things.
But okay,
this is the difference
I don't
between
even think that Pirelli is the problem. I think it's the whole lift and coast thing. Like the whole idea
engine management and
the engine management. Just like on this particular point, I'm going to agree with you because I see a lot of parallels between qualifying in the 80s and qualifying now. That it's the most important or the most exciting and variable part of the weekend, but ultimately meaningless.
Meaningless. Exactly.
Yeah.
Unless you're at Monaco.
Unless you're at Monaco. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know, Charles gets the pole, but we know it doesn't matter. And I mean, maybe this year Ferrari's a little bit better. So, but like in the past, if Charles got the pole, we knew that the Red Bulls were coming through. It was just a matter of time.
But that arguably that's a systemic issue, not a driver issue.
Sure, but the drivers have to drive.
I get it, but
they have to win in a way that's going to allow them to win. And I would say that, look, Charles is a great example because his predecessor, like his spiritual predecessor anyway, Gilles Villeneuve, the greatest driver that's ever lived. I'm sure.
Go ahead.
Wait. You cannot argue Gilles Villeneuve and Prost in the same argument.
I'm not saying that one is better than the other. That's not what this argument is about. It's the fact that I think that Prost's skills and his way of going about things means that he is underrated. He is underrated because of this exact argument. Because
I see him as akin to Vettel. I see Prost as similar to Vettel.
That's interesting.
Okay, go on.
In the fact that he won 4 world championships by being the best version of what was required at that point in time. Sebastian Vettel was the best driver of a blown diffuser, V8 Red Bull of that time. Like, he could not be touched in that type of car, in that type of situation. Alain Prost was benefited by being a driver who understood the limitations of his car better than other people and could drive around issues. Like I was watching recently the 1987 Hungarian Grand Prix.
Yeah.
Alain Prost broke on the start line. He went into the pits and they fixed it, but it was some turbo problem and they said it was probably terminal. He drove around in like 20th place, going like half speed. 5 cars finished that Grand Prix. He was 2 laps down and on the podium.
I love that. That to me tells me that he knows how the game works. He's able to keep a car going. Like
he just lucked into it backwards.
That's not, mate. That's not.
They should have allowed me to drive a car that day.
Yeah, you should have. Yeah, but that's not luck, though, is it? Like being able to get your non-turbo car when it should be a turbo, driving around and still get a podium. And
it is.
And he didn't win a title in '87.
You don't know.
He just did what he needed to do to get. If you. This is what Murray Walker always said. You've got to be in it to win it. Like,
but that's the thing, is that's a very defined period of time that you could bank on that many people retiring from that many Grand Prix. If you drove like that now, you just finish fifth every race.
But yeah, but he wouldn't. But I don't think that that's how he would drive right now. It's not that he drove like that because he wanted to drive like that. My contention is that he drove like that because he knew that was the best way to get points and win championships. And actually, I do have I do have to push back on the fact that it was just one era. He did it across multiple eras. He did it across the span of the turbo era from inception to when it finished. And he did it in the normally aspirated era when it started with an engine that nobody else was using. When everyone else had gone to V10s, he was still sat in a V12. And 1990 was probably, I think, and he would agree, his best season, where he didn't necessarily have the fastest car, but he was still able to mount a credible championship challenge, right? How did he do that? He did it by not being visceral, by not being the absolute fastest into every corner. He did it by being smart about it.
By being slow. Yeah, I agree.
You call it slow, I call it smart, right?
No, I understand. And there's a reason he's called the professor. And I'm not trying to be facetious here. I understand the argument. But at the same time, when you're looking at the greats of the sport, tell me one memorable Prost overtake. One.
Okay, I will. I've got one for you.
Okay.
Estoril 1988.
Okay.
Oh, against squeezing Senna off the start?
No, other way around, right? So
restart, Senna pushed him in
when Senna pushed. And I think that actually says a lot about Alain Prost, right? That when he's being Schumachered against the wall,
oh god, yeah.
he keeps his foot in and makes the pass and wins the race by a lot.
That was a start line. Like
no, it was 2 laps round.
Was it? I thought it was off the start. Okay.
So Shez, in answering that question, you're making the point for us, which is someone like you that is knee deep in this and you're on the bandwagon can remember that. But the rest of us would not bring that up. And the reason for this is the wrong conversation to have, because it's not about being underrated in general. It's about being underrated relative to who we think about as legendary GOAT statuses, right? We think about Mount Rushmores, right? And the reason he does not show up on that is because I have zero memories of anything that comes to a signature moment, right? And Double was sort of explaining that a while back, but I have nothing. I cannot tell you anything. And I've gone back and watched some races. Like, okay, yeah, he did win, but I think there's winning and then there's winning, right? That actually feels like winning. And there's a reason that sport exists, and it exists for it to be as quick as you can. I mean, these guys are riding some of the fastest cars in the world, if not the fastest car. So what you're arguing against is to have a 23 race season where every race looks like Singapore. And I would love Singapore 23 to happen once. I sure as hell don't want to see it happen 24 times in a row. And that's kind of how a lot of that era was. It's like, let's just drive as slow as we can, but for different reasons. I get it. So he maximized his chances. I'm not saying that. But that doesn't mean that he will show up in my memory as one of the guys that I will think about. I mean, heck, I think about Juan Manuel Fangio more than that, and I have very little footage of him watching him too. But
why do you have memories of Fangio?
I mean, just because he's legendary. Whatever I've seen of him.
So, just based on results.
Yes, I mean, this is my opinion too, right? But I mean, there you go. That's my list.
I mean, you could see their arms, and they were all
there you
like
go,
this.
Right?
Like,
they were all doing that.
Right? Oh, come on! But I mean,
that was a whole different. So I just want to make one quick point, just to circle back to this Prost being sort of unspectacular thing. Like, if we go and we look at each of the drivers that are on that Mount Rushmore, like, who are the people that,
yes,
if Prost is underrated, then who's above him?
Oh, let's do this. Come on.
Right.
Oh, so we're actually going to do.
No. I'm saying like, this is going to be subjective for everyone. It's different. But I'm saying, like, if we have that conversation, there's going to be like 5 guys, right? There's going to be Lewis. There's going to be probably Senna. There's going to be Schumacher, obviously. Maybe Lauda. Maybe.
That fourth Fangio is very contentious.
Yeah, I think Fangio has to be there, right? Because of what he achieved in lots of different cars in an era where things shouldn't have.
And Max is getting there.
Max isn't there.
Max is getting there. Max is getting there. He's not there yet, but he's getting there.
Yeah.
So you've got all of these people. And if I say to you, name me one spectacular Lewis Hamilton drive in the rain, you're going to say Silverstone 08. You're going to say, like, right away, like, you're going to have that. What's a spectacular Schumacher race in the rain? You're going to say, you know, Barcelona 96. Senna race in the rain, you're going to say any number of the great races he's had in the rain. If you're going to say a great overtake by Michael Schumacher, you're going to say, oh yeah, I got lots of those. You're going to say, you know, his overtake into in Spa there, into Lake Home. Like, you're going to say any number of things that Schumacher did in like the 94, 95, mostly 95. Like, he was mega in those Benettons. Like, there are many, and I was not a Schumacher fan. And then you're going to remember Hammer Time for Lewis, when he just pumped in fastest lap after fastest lap after fastest lap. And that was very Schumacher. Like, that was like, it pains me to say it, but like, Schumacher just stands above Prost in the memory by his sheer force of, like, Hungary 98. I'm going to do 3 pit stops. And I'm just going to cram those fastest laps in. I'm just going to hit this. And Prost never had any of those races where he just made your jaw drop and say, wow, like, look at this talent. It was always, oh, everybody else went out and Prost won, or Senna had troubles and Prost won, or Prost barely held on there, but he got it in the end. Like, I have watched so many races, and I have never seen, other than, you know, Mexico 90, which was still, you know, I will give him one, but even then I would say that, like, the McLaren just ate its tires and Senna made a dumb move by not coming in.
Senna was driving that car, though, you know.
Yeah. But I think that they made a bad call by not pitting. And if he had pitted like Berger and Mansell had, then anyway,
Alain would have won the race.
Yeah, well, but Senna wouldn't have ended on the side of the road with a shredded tire, right?
Indeed.
But you know, there were races that Prost beat Senna on merit, but they were never like spectacular beatdowns. They were usually like controlled, measured drives, and I guess that's a good thing. But it's not something like remembering Michael Schumacher's greatest races, like remembering Nürburgring 95 or remembering like Hungary 98, or, you know, you have these memories of people, of every other driver in that list, be it, you know, Nicky coming back from his crash, and just, you know, there's so many memories of all these other drivers that are just like transcending the sort of ordinary of race driving. But Prost was like Professor Ordinary, you know?
Yeah. Okay, but that's where I have a contention, right? That's where I get irked by this, because doing what he did, doing that ordinary thing, is not ordinary. To do it for as long as he did and to adapt it for the circumstances that he was in, that for me is the most underrated aspect of what he does. And this for me comes down to how you consume the sport and what you value in it, right? And I'm happy to have different values to other people that watch the sport, but that doesn't mean that the values that I have, that Prost brings us, should be undervalued, that they're any less than how somebody else went racing, right? And for me, there's two major archetypes that are still being adhered to today. There is the on it all the time, every lap is a qualifying lap. I'm gonna pass everyone come what may. Senna, Verstappen kind of mentality. Schumacher falls into that category as well, right? But Schumacher was also doing what he needed to do in the era that he was driving. He was in an era where, with pit stops and refueling, it was sprints between pit stops. So he did what he needed to do and was very good at it in that era. Mm-hmm. Whereas Prost was in an era where, you know, what do I need to do? How do I set the car up beforehand? How do I prep beforehand to get the best out of the situation that I'm going to find myself in on Sunday? And everything, including qualifying, was homework to get to that point. And
right. So what I'm saying is that
you might
era,
you might find that unspectacular, and you might find that bookish and boring. But for me, you can't. Whether you find it boring, you can't undervalue its effectiveness and the fact that he made a conscious decision to do that.
Okay, can I give you an example from another
Please.
sport?
Yeah, of course.
So, but I'm dating this podcast now, but
we need that. We definitely need that.
Sorry about that. You can cut that out. NHL went through a period in like 95 to like 2003 that they called the dead puck era. That whole era, nobody tried any less hard to win, and nobody deserved their Stanley Cups any less. But we don't look at that era and the stars of that era in the same light as we look at the ones that go run and gun and score the spectacular goals, and in an era when talent was able to flourish, right? And this is Alain Prost, is he existed in garbage time. Like when you
change your birth date.
Yeah, like he existed in the time.
I was with you. I was following. I was like, yes, yeah, until that last little bit, man.
But no, I know I'm being facetious here. Like, just let me finish. Let me finish my point, and then you can roast me. But what I'm saying is, if you look at like the 1980s in the turbo era, that era rewarded spectacular driving the least. It rewarded the types of things that we love to see our Formula One do the least. And it has a lot of nostalgia, and I love it. Personally, the turbo era is like great. But in reality, if you look at the result sheets, there were a lap between cars quite often. Like somebody now who just started watching in Drive to Survive era went back and watched the 1987 Hungarian Grand Prix, they would be asleep on lap 5. Would not be enough to cut it, and everybody would be on Twitter saying how boring Formula One is in that era. And in the time, it was great. And in the time, if you can transport yourself to that time, it's great. But in hindsight, I just think there were a lot better, faster, more talented, outright
more talented.
Yes, drivers like with raw speed, pace, talent, whatever, who didn't either drove with their arses like Nigel, or drove with like calculating precision like Senna, but often took it over the limit. It was an era that uniquely benefited drivers who never took it past that limit. And he was the best at doing that in that era. But that's why we don't remember him, is because the skills that made you great in that era were some of the more tedious and less sort of valued skills that we see in our racing drivers. And that's not his fault per se, but he never had to demonstrate that he had the raw pace of an Ayrton Senna. And when he did, he got out qualified to like crazy to him. Like that's clear.
I don't know about race pace, but definitely on qualifying pace. I agree with you. I don't think there's even a comparison there. It's day and night different. My pushback to that is that 80s is remembered as an era where giants walked through Formula One, right? You had the Villeneuves, you had the Piquets, you had the Mansells and the Sennas, and Prost is remembered within that and he should be as the guy that essentially, from what you're saying, and I agree with you, outsmarted all of them, because they weren't the ones that were the most successful. It was Prost that was able to understand what the assignment was and played to that. In fact, when you look at, if you were to say this to anybody now, that the biggest drivers of the 80s were drivers like Mansell, were drivers like Senna and Piquet and Rosberg, right? Prost still won a title there, didn't he? Prost Prost beat all of them other than Piquet in the same car. You know, as much as you want to talk about Senna in '88, and yes, the drop scores hurt Alain a lot. He should have won that title if there weren't drop scores. And I know offline we've had this argument before as well, Double. But he came back the next season and beat him in the same car again. So he clearly understood what it was he needed to do, whether that was to just finish the race or push when he needed to. That for me is the mark of a great driver, and why for me anyone that looks to undervalue the cerebral nature of the way Alain went racing is doing him a disservice for me.
And we're also kind of ignoring his Renault years too, because he kind of went to finishing school in a car that melted if you looked at it, and maybe that sort of framed his later experiences by driving a Renault that was like overheating if you like
and his thoughts about the wet. You know why doesn't he drive? Why doesn't he drive harder in the wet? Because of what happened in Hockenheim. I completely agree. But we're all a product of our lived experiences, right? Oof. Agree to disagree. This has been that kind of episode.
It's all in good fun.
Yeah, right. Maybe Prost is fated to ever be underrated, but at least on this corner of the Tired F1 pod, there will always be a little Prost corner. And on that bombshell, we're going to have to say, see you later. As always, like, subscribe. Please leave a comment. We read all of them. We even respond to some of them. Double, thank you so much for coming on. This has been an absolute pleasure and an honor. And Ammar, as always, I'll see you next time.
Meh.